Good evening. Welcome. Come on in. Those of you who are still coming in, plenty of seats up here in the front. My name is Laura Hartley. I have the privilege of serving here at Seattle Pacific University as provost, and I am truly delighted to welcome you this evening to the first lecture in our 2022-23 Faith, Science, and Diversity lecture series. This lecture series, now in its second year, is co-hosted by the Office of Inclusive Excellence and the Biology Department as part of the SPU's Supporting Structures Innovative Partnerships to Enhance Bench Science grant from SCIO, Scholarship and Christianity in Oxford, with funding from the John Templeton Foundation and the M.J. Murdoch Charitable Trust. Tonight's lecture is also co-sponsored by the SPU Land Acknowledgement Committee as the first event in our week-long celebration of Indigenous peoples. I'd like to start tonight, as we often do in our public events here, by acknowledging that as a Christian university, we recognize that we are a people who are formed by a story. Our story at Seattle Pacific is tied to the land that this campus is built on, a land that holds rich and far too often forgotten histories. Seattle Pacific University is named for a city that takes its name from Chief Seattle, the chief of the Duwamish people, whose territory and traditional land stretch across our campus. We respectfully acknowledge, with gratitude, that we are gathering today on the lands, both ceded and unceded, of the Coast Salish peoples, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations, people who are still here today. We recognize that a statement without actions is not enough. As a community who strives to love God and neighbor, we repent of the ways that we have participated in harm. We commit to reconciliation and repair with the Coast Salish peoples as we continue to learn to care for the land. Before we welcome our distinguished speaker tonight, we will receive a musical offering by Dr. Danis Vesakonis by Navajo pianist and composer Connor Chi. Connor Chi is known for combining his classical piano training with his Native American heritage. Chi made his Carnegie Hall debut at the age of 12 after winning a gold medal in the World Piano Competition. A graduate of the Eastman School of Music and the University of Cincinnati's College Conservatory of Music, Chi's solo piano music is inspired by traditional Navajo chants and songs. This evening, Dr. Vesakonis will be performing Navajo Vocables No. 9 for solo piano, composed by Connor Chi in 2014. Chi's Navajo vocables are based on traditional Navajo corn grinding songs, as well as chants from the Navajo Enemy Way ceremony. The term vocables refers to the non-lexical syllables used in Indigenous chants to carry melodic lines. In Chi's collection, the vocables have been transferred to the piano, bringing what was once a strictly oral tradition to a new outlet. After Dr. Vesakonis' performance, Dr. Brian Luhioyo will come forward to introduce our speaker. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Danis Vesakonis in a performance of Connor Chi's Navajo Vocable No. 9.
That was beautiful. Thank you. As we start, why don't we stand for prayer, and we will pray. This is a prayer from Caitlin Curtis, a Native American theologian. Creator, we long to know the earth in the intimate ways she's known us. We long to be the kind of people who listen more than we speak. May we always be listening. We repent of the ways we have chosen to fill our pockets with money instead of our souls with the goodness of the earth. May we change our ways. May we honor her. We acknowledge the indigenous peoples who have always cared for the land. We acknowledge that we must learn from them, honor their stories, and pay attention to a deeper kind of relationship. May we dig deeper. Creator, we hope for a future in which we are hospitable because the earth is hospitable. We long for a future in which our relationship is born out of our constant connectedness, so that when we care for one another, we are caring for her. May hospitality be our future. This we pray. And God's people said, amen. It's my privilege to welcome to the podium Busy Feeks. Busy is an artist, a seminarian, and she comes from the Winnebago tribe and the Ho-Chunk people. She's also a really big Randy Woodley fan. So please welcome her to the stage so she can introduce our speaker tonight.
Hanachiki ni negari wina rashraga biziga higairena. I greet you this evening. My name is Busy. I come from the Winnebago tribe and the Ho-Chunk people of the big voice. For those who don't know me, I'm a seminary student here in my second year in the Reconciliation and Intercultural Studies program. More than being a student, I'm an artist, a writer, and a storyteller. As you're probably well aware, today is Indigenous Peoples Day. I feel abundantly grateful to be here. And I don't just mean here in this room today, I mean like here in its entirety. If it were not for all the resilient and beautiful people, my ancestors and my relatives who came before me, who fought for me and prayed for me, I wouldn't be here today. And basically words will never be enough to really capture how grateful I am, but I can offer one of my favorite quotes from the movie Smoke Signals. It's a good day to be Indigenous. I'm here today to introduce our guest speaker, who is a man of many titles and many talents. Randy Woodley he has quite an extensive list of credentials. He's a public intellectual, author, activist, farmer, scholar, speaker, and wisdom keeper. He is a recognized leader in the fields of Indigenous and intercultural studies, ecology, spirituality, race, theology, and missiology. I feel especially privileged to introduce him today because of the impact his work has had on me. I'm especially drawn to and compelled by his work regarding ecology and identity. I am a mixed-race individual. I try to navigate this world carrying a lot of those tensions, and a lot of the work he has written has helped me to try to strive to walk in a good way and to care for the earth as my relative. Randy Woodley's work has been and continues to be good medicine for me, and I hope that can be the same for you as well. So please join me in welcoming him tonight. And on behalf of the SPU community, we'd like to offer you this Coast Salish blanket.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. From each generation.
Yeah, I think so.
That's the place to be.
Yeah.
Thank you all. We'll put this down here. Grab a few loose ends. And this. And this for my first magic trick contest.
So, okay, we're good. A second. Let me see if my... Ha! Yeah, that works. Okay. So my wife and I, our first thing we were going to do is just ask a blessing and from a song from her traditions. And if you just stand, this will be a prayer song. This is a song for prayer, blessing, and healing. I think that's mostly how we pray in Indian, at least as I've been around. Mostly we sing our prayers. So today is Indigenous Peoples Day. How many relate to being Indigenous today? Okay, let me share a secret with you. We're all Indigenous from somewhere. If your people weren't Indigenous from somewhere, you wouldn't be here today because they had to learn how to live with the land with another group of people in order to make it. So I'm going to ask you to dig down in your Indigenous roots and feel Indigenous today. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. So, if you want to stalk me or anything like that, you can do that. This is entitled Indigenous Spirit, Weaving Justice and Peace in a Wounded Land. And so that's why I sing the healing song today, is so that our land begins to heal. And that's, I used to, talk about, when I first started talking about our stuff, it's like there's so much that non-Indigenous people don't know. I mean, oh my gosh. And it's not your fault because you weren't supposed to know it. In fact, you were supposed to know the opposite. You were supposed to know the myths that told stories about our people, right? That told lies about our people. And so that's part of the American system. That's part of the American myth. And so I don't blame anybody, but there's so much. And so we always had a hard time, like, how do we start talking to people about Native stuff, right? Because there's just so much they don't know. And so we used to talk about, like, Edith's dad was a victim of residential boarding schools. And we talk about that, and we talk about the 60 scoop and how they used to take children and, out of homes and just put them out for adoption, Native children, and be raised by white families and all these things. But it got to be almost like what I call trauma porn, right? It's like, and it didn't seem like it was empowering us. Now, you still need to know all that stuff, but read about it. Go to the boarding school healing project.com or .org, I forget which it is, and read about that stuff. They have lots of things for you to read, okay? And then I kind of swung the other way, and I was like, I got to tell people about all the great things that Native people have done, right? We've invented so many things, and we've done so much, and people are always surprised, and again, you weren't supposed to know that, right? And so, so where I've finally landed in about the last decade is, and I don't want to have a hidden agenda, but I do have an agenda for you. So I am out to convert you tonight, okay? I want to make converts out of all of you, and I want to convert you from a Western worldview to a more Indigenous worldview. That's my goal. The Western worldview will not sustain us into the future. And so if you want a future, You got to start looking for a different worldview. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's start with Genesis 2:15. The whole idea of dominion, right? To conquer, right? No, that's not what it's about. I had the help of one of my students. He did his whole term paper on the word dominion. Isn't that cool? I mean, and so what he came up with is a better, more applicable, more in context, given that all the other words around that word. And he came up with the word co-sustainer. Co-sustainer. Go out and be co-sustainers in the world. It's great. So dominion doesn't necessarily mean to dominate by force. King James liked that because he was a king, right? So that was a good translation. But to take responsibility for, to be an agent being responsible to assure the well-being of those in their care. These are like original instructions to be co-sustainers. Like in the old days, we say steward, right? To be stewards. People still like to use that in religious places, but steward comes from the word sty ward, the pigsty, taking care of the pigsty, sty ward. So I want to be a co-sustainer. I don't want to be taking care of the pigsty. So, but taking responsibility. Now, that was fine when you and your people were indigenous and you saw from a holistic worldview. But we've been invaded over about the last 3,000 years with some particular thought from starting probably before, but with the Greeks, at least we can trace, with this idea of Platonic dualism, this idea that privileges the ethereal world over the material world, so that our bodies become less sacred than our minds. The earth becomes less sacred than the spirit. But that is not reality. That's a distorted view of reality. So there's been a radical misunderstanding of humanity's place within the created order. So the West has failed then, as a result, to till and to keep the soil and to serve the whole community of creation as a result. We ourselves are organic, but I love this, like one cup of earth has all these things in it, right? And the Genesis story traces us to be earth, to be made from that. And we are made up of minerals and salts and all the kinds of things that you find in the earth. So it's a pretty good story, right? But what does it mean then? It's kind of cool that us who are walking earth, our job is to maintain the rest of the earth, what I call the whole community of creation. That's our purpose. If you want to know, you don't have to go on some existential quest. If you want to know what your purpose is in life, it's to maintain the community of creation. That includes people in harmony and balance, in shalom, if you will. So that's what we are. We're people who are supposed to be caretakers, who are supposed to be co-sustainers of God's good earth. Functionally, to be human, to be a human being, is to be a co-sustainer of the literal earth. I was told one time, human beings were created last because they were the pinnacle of creation. Like, I look at human beings compared to animal life, and I'm like, pretty sure that's not true. But what I think is true is that, we're the only ones equipped to do the job. And so that's why we were created. Like, everything else is created, and now we got to keep things in harmony, in balance. And so it's going to take humans to do that, and that's who we are. That's our role, to restore and maintain harmony in the world, in the community of creation. So there's a people called the Karuk people in Northern California. Anybody here from Northern California? Yay! You ever heard of the Karuk? Okay, they're there. And I've been to their ceremony, which is called the Pikyavish, or Fixing the World ceremony. They take their job seriously as people who are fixing the earth, who are taking care of the earth, who are praying for the earth and restoring it. They dance, they sing, they feast, they pray, and all of that every year for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. They've been doing that because they're taking their role as earth tenders, as co-sustainers seriously. So one of the things that I like to talk about, and I'm not going to go through all this stuff, but just like we know about all this stuff right here, ancient Greece and China and Egypt and all these things, but we don't know much about what we call, you ready for this? This is a terrible day to say this, but pre-Columbian history. Remember this used to be Columbus Day? All right, you get it. Okay. So, but anyway, all this kind of stuff was going on in Native America I like to say actually pre-invasion. So pre-invasion. Places like Chaco Canyon, New Mexico now it's called. Just look at the ingenuity that it took to make this Chaco Canyon, I'll just give you a second to read that. And most of our ancient sites were also astrological observation places. This culture in now Phoenix, Arizona. Anybody from Phoenix area? Hey, there we go. They're still discovering, right? They still discover the waterways that the Hokum people were doing. In that area, 500 miles of canals irrigated 110,000 acres, food for about 80,000 people. Yeah. And here's one of the, on the bottom right, one of the ones that were discovered when I was down there, and I got a picture from the paper. Cahokia, 40,000 people. The Aztecs feeding 200,000 people in swampy land, creating floating gardens. So this whole idea that Native America was just a bunch of, people in, loincloths, hiding behind trees, half naked, that's not true. At the time of quote-unquote discovery, there were anywhere between basically 60 to 110 million people in North America. The largest attrition rate of any population in the history of the world occurred within 100 years of invasion. But let's look at Western Europe in the late Middle Ages. About 530 years ago, what were they going through? You might get a clue if you're looking at that picture. Deforestation. They had cut down a lot of their hardwoods and most of their oak forest. Why? Well, they're building forts, and they're building castles, and they're building cathedrals. But also, they were smelting iron, right? For tools and for weapons. And so the first, anybody here from Virginia? No Virginians. Okay. Oh, we got one. All right, great. The first export from quote-unquote America were oak trees from the Jamestown area. So they basically started sending them back and building, and a lot of your cathedrals and things in Europe are built with American oak, virgin oak. Topsoil was becoming depleted, oceans and bays polluted and fished out, rivers and streams undrinkable, air pollution, disease, large mammals were going extinct, classism, talk about your 1%, cities overcrowded, etc. All that was happening back then, and now it's happening here. Same thing. Why? Because they brought a particular worldview with them to this country, and now we're suffering as a result. There was an interesting, people still remember who Mother Teresa is? Okay. Mother Teresa was doing an interview with, we'll see if you know this one. Do you remember who Dan Rather is? Okay. Dan Rather was doing I just got to check, I'm getting at that age, right? So Dan Rather was doing an interview with Mother Teresa, and one of the questions he asked her, he said, Mother Teresa, why did Jesus say, you'll always have the poor with you? And she looked at him with her little beady gray eyes. She's a little Albanian nun, right? And she says, that's easy. If we don't have the poor, the rich can't be saved. It's an interesting way to look at things. Kind of like an Aikido move, if anybody knows Aikido, right? You use the idea of your opponent's strength as their weakness. I'm saying, without a different worldview and in particular in this country, I think the Native American worldview is a much better choice. And worldviews aren't immutable. They used to, anthropologists used to think they were, but now they're not. We can't be saved. We can't be saved. Now, maybe you'll find a different worldview other than Native American, but it's right here and it's ready, right? And so if we want to save our place on the earth, we've got to shuck our Western worldviews, and we've got to begin to take on another worldview. And I believe that should be a Native American worldview. CO2 is being released into the atmosphere faster any time in 66 million years. Unhealthy humans, faster, bigger, cheaper, depleting the Earth's soil at 13%. We've lost 75% of the world crop varieties in the last century. One of the reasons that we have a seed company, we're preserving seeds. In the last 10 years, 100 million tons of herbicides dumped onto our crops, including our soils and streams. GE crops are speeding up that destructive process by altering the composition of soil bacteria in the fields where such crops are grown. Topsoil is disappearing, forests are shrinking. You all know this stuff, right? I'm just reminding you. This is climate change porn. Desertification, coral reefs, plants, all going extinct. And then water. But Native Americans have lived here for at least 28,000 years. Now they're beginning to say, some are saying up to 200,000 years. I don't know, but I know we've got proof at least for 28,000 years. So, and haven't permanently endangered the land. Not because Native people were born with a knowledge to do this. It's no, you don't come, get born and all of a sudden as a baby, I need to treat the earth as a relative. No, you have to learn those things. You learn from your mistakes. And so with 28,000 plus years on the land, Native American people may have something to teach the newcomers, right? Aquifers are draining, etc. The only thing I want to point out here is especially big agriculture uses 70% of all water and they waste the most. And I'm against the big ag, and I have a small farm, and I'll show you in a minute that small farms can change the world and feed the world. And connect the dots, water shortages translate to food shortages. So disasters are all going up, earthquakes, forest fires. Hurricanes are about even, but they're getting more in severity. Everything else is increasing in severity. This has been going on I started keeping track in 2000, and at that time it wasn't readily available on Google, So Google hadn't been invented by then, believe me. And so it was like, well, something's happening here. And we can see, look at Washington and Oregon, for example, how the temperature continues to rise from 1950 until now. The trajectory's not good, folks. But God builds with this kind of unique approach. First of all, with unity and diversity. From subatomic quarks, anybody here going to be somebody who studies atoms and quarks and, quantum physics or anything like that? Somebody needs to. Come on. This is like incredible creative stuff that God has done. To the macroverse, the multiverse, it's like there's nothing singular in the whole of all existence. Nothing. Even when you get down to subatomic particles of those little quarks moving around, they're always with other quarks. They're moving around. So it's like, so, and this is why I'm a Trinitarian, because God can't be singular. God has to be some sort of multiple in order to have a fingerprint that is unity and diversity. That's Creator's DNA. So God's way of building is not like ours. There you go. That's how we build. We build and we think of order as stability. But our order is actually what's falling apart. Nature's chaos, what we're seeing happen right now and we think is chaos, is actually stability. Because nature continues to adapt in order to come out on top. This is a really, really important point. This is important for if you're going to start a business. This is important if you're part of a school. This is important if you're starting a family. important with everything you do. Adaptation is stability. We don't think of it that way, right? Western worldview is the opposite. Great mystery God builds in open systems like fractals. They contain both unity and diversity. Homogeneous closed systems are built to die. Whether it's race, gender, monocultural, hybrid, GMO crops, all that leads to eventual destruction. The nature of a closed system is to collapse in on itself and or be consumed by other more adaptive systems. Nature of open systems is to adapt. And I just want to draw your attention to this bottom picture on the right. And somebody asked me the other day, well, what's a system that's done that? And I said, look at that picture. Our churches are emptying. People are going like, I don't want this old model. I don't want, the paradigm that was handed to me. I don't want your homophobia. I don't want your racism. I don't want your, the way you polluted the earth. And I realize I'm a okay boomer here talking. Because that system is built to die. But people are forming new communities in new ways and doing new things that bring people together in love. Adaptation. Order is the reality of planning and perseverance in sustainable systems. That's what order is. Order works with entropy, not against it, building open, adaptable systems of unity and diversity. I see some science people are like getting excited and shaking their heads. Chaos is attempting to fight entropy through unsustainable, closed, non-adaptive systems. That's what's chaotic. If you're not open to change, you're creating chaos. Climate change, and we can talk more about that hopefully in our discussion. Zoonosis, which is zoonotic transfer from animal disease to humans. That's occurring more and more because of our high rate of development. Chronic diseases, these are all a Western world's rejection of creation's natural laws given by Creator. Nature adapts to survive. That's sort of like number one rule. Under the present circumstances, the final adaptation of nature is human extinction. It's like we are meant to be tertiary consumers. Anybody know, like science folks, what's the number one producer of energy on Earth? It's right on the tip of your tongue, I know it. Phytoplankton. And what is the number one consumer of energy on the Earth? Again, it's right on the tip of your tongue. It's part of the other word. Plankton, you got it. Plankton or zooplankton, we say, different kinds of plankton. And like that consumes, do you know that plankton supplies 1/3 of all the Earth's oxygen? It's really cool, right? So that's what's happening without us even doing a thing. And then, fish kind of jump in, and then way down the line are mammals like us. And we're just tertiary consumers. Tertiary means, basically we just take a bite here and take a bite there. But in the last century, we have become the number one consumers of energy on Earth. And the Earth's not going to stand for that. So it's sort of like Earth strikes back, right? If you can't take your place, we're going to remove your place. So my understanding, under the present circumstances, the final adaptation of nature is human extinction. We only have a short time to come back from our own unsustainable chaos and back to Creator's sustainable order. There we go. So how do we do that? First of all, the Western worldview does not have a relationship with the land. And as a result, it does not have a good relationship with people. And so there's a corollary between how European Americans have traditionally, by this worldview, treated creation and people, especially women, especially cultural, racial, genderized, immigrant, others, and the poor, and that is to control nature and women, etc., to objectify, to expect production from, to exploit, to serve at one's pleasure, and create a variable rape culture. And I hate to use that word, but that's actually where we're at. We have to realize that there's another way to relate to creation. We're all indigenous from someplace. The Western worldview causes us to forget our indigeneity. Yeah, it started inserting itself 3,000 years ago, but now we got choice because we realize we're a part of something that we didn't realize we were a part of. We're all human. To be human is to be a person who takes care of the earth. We're all earth keepers. Humankind is not woven the web of life, but we are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. Chief Seattle. I love this scripture in Job. Jesus, was like, there was like stuff going on, technology, right? During, this hillbilly boy from Galilee. And he was hanging out in Jerusalem. I mean, the first time he went to Jerusalem, he was probably looking up at the buildings like I did the first time I went to New York City, It's like, and he saw these things, these marvels, aqueducts and, lights at nighttime and, chariots and, weaponry and all these things. But he didn't talk about any of that stuff. He talked about flowers. He talked about birds. He talked about crops. He talked about seeds, trees. Those are the things that impressed him. Ask the animals, they'll teach you. Or the birds of the air, and they'll tell you. Speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish of the sea inform you. What? Isn't that paganism or some kind of thing like that? What's that doing in there? So being categorized apart from creation is not reality, right? It's a false dichotomy between a physical earth and spiritual beings, our spirituality. A harmony worldview, or we could say a shalom worldview, if we want to draw from ancient Israel. Human beings are understood as fully physical and the earth is fully spiritual. The earth is sacred. There's a problem with worldview when all of creation is not considered sacred. So we have to fix the world. Like Jesus said, don't swear by heaven. That's God's throne, right? Don't swear by the earth. That's God's footstool. In other words, it's all sacred. I'm going to go quickly so we have lots of time to talk together. But this is one of the comparisons I do between a Western worldview and Indigenous worldview. I think it's apples to apples. But if you look at that worldview, and I know that this is being recorded, so this will all be available for you. You don't have to write all these down or anything like that. But I think this world over here is anti-Christ. It's antithetical to what Jesus taught. This worldview over here looks more like what Jesus taught. Then I want to ask you a question, because I believe God is the most vulnerable being who exists. Could it be that God is the most vulnerable being who exists? If God is love and love means being vulnerable, then God must represent the essence of vulnerability. In Creator's vulnerability, we're invited to become fellow human beings with others who are different from us, to exchange and empower dignity in ourselves and others, to join in reciprocal conversion of each other's understanding of truth, and to live with, for, and among the community of creation, including people in harmony. The opposite of vulnerability, or I would say the opposite of love, it's not hate. Hate you have to stoke, right? You got to be passionate about hating someone or hating something. You got to keep that up. You're actually maintaining it. You don't want to admit that you're keeping that fire burning, but you care enough to keep that fire burning. I don't think hate is the opposite of love. I think the opposite of love is superficiality, indifference, and control. including the illegitimate use of power. The misuse of power is primary among the failures of colonizer religion. So where do we go from here? Critically examine your Western worldview and shed unhelpful paradigms. Try to find a more indigenous worldview. It might be, from another place. That's okay. Anything that gets you out of this, what I would call anti-Christ worldview of the West. So steps for religions of the West. Be adaptable. Be intentional. Have a diversity in worship experiences. Be educated by BIPOC folk. No longer, we think that as Americans, one of our highest values has become comfort. That's not like, in Scripture. That's not even taught among our indigenous people. Comfort is just something that we've gotten used to, but, think about being uncomfortable. What happens when you're uncomfortable? You start to think outside your normal routine. You start to, like anybody here? I know there's a lot of people here, probably psychology majors, right? One of the first things they'll tell you, hey, this week, you usually put your right shoe on. Start putting your left shoe on first this week. It creates cognitive dissonance. And during that time, you're open, you're more adaptable, you can change. So that's what happens when you get uncomfortable. Exploring and embracing diversity narratives that are no longer monocultural white myths, and those are taught everywhere. They're on our road signs, they're in our textbooks, etc., etc. Racially diverse leadership, sharing power, no longer tokenism. I always tell people who are going to hire, we're going to hire a person of color. I'm like, don't. They're like, what? Hire two. Don't hire one. Self-deprecating humor, don't take ourselves too seriously. Honestly, I know only about half of you are white people here, but I'm going to tell you a secret, okay? One of the things Native people say behind your back, why do white people take themselves so seriously? Right? It's like, laugh at yourself. We're just human beings. That's kind of funny. Embodied, empowered congregations as centers of proactive change, no longer dualistic. Disembodied theologies, right? We love to do disembodied theology, or what I call milquetoast. Ben, you're going to love this one. I always say, they say, what's a missiologist? And I'm going to say, you know what a theologian is? They'll go, yeah. Well, a missiologist is actually somebody who does their theology. Ouch. Winona LaDuke says this, food for us comes from our relatives, whether they have wings, fins, or roots. That's how we consider food. Food has a culture. It has a history. It has a story. It has relationships. And this idea of us being related to all of creation goes back to that Genesis story, if you will. That these things are our relatives. When we watch the hummingbirds, we're watching our relatives. We have a reciprocal relationship with them. And here's some studies that you can look up where small farms have been proven to produce higher yields per acre and more nutritious foods. Small farms can feed the world. We need to get rid of industrial farming. These are just some quick individual steps. And then these are this is just sort of all basic stuff. I'm just going to let you come back to the PowerPoint for these. These are sort of just general rules when you're shopping. Look for that non-GMO verified. Look for organic, right? Stay away from these companies. Students, stay away from these companies. Okay? They're trying to poison you and kill you. And they're trying to poison the earth. Any kind of bottled water you buy, almost, except for, there's a few, but I won't mention them yet, but you're buying from Nestle's or Coca-Cola, who are destroying our aquifers. Washington and Oregon failed to just have GMO verified products, labels on our food because of all the money that Monsanto and other people put into against us. And we both failed. Activist states like ours. This is like a very organized opponent. And then this is not just about me and what I do, but this is about structural change, right? About our laws, like the ones up top, and especially about this bottom part here. The fastest way that we can, and you can, in your community, stop the tragedy that's happening to Mother Earth right now is to give the earth human rights, to give the water that is in your society, your city, whatever, human rights. And it's been happening. It actually started in Pennsylvania in 2006. I'm going to just show you quickly rights of nature. Especially I want you to, if you just subscribe to one thing, get the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature newsletter. GARN. So this started like in Pennsylvania. They just wanted their water to come out without gas in it, where you could light it on fire from the faucet, And so they made laws that protect against fracking in the water system. And then, it went on from there. Ecuador and Bolivia created constitutions that have rights of nature. New Zealand is famous for granting the same legal rights to a river. And then it goes on and on. Here's a bunch of our different tribes that have done this. And then cities like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they have the right to have frackless water systems. Santa Monica, California, that all water and all natives is supposed to be CCs, not PPs. Sorry, must have been late. All native species within them protected. So this is the fastest way to stop climate change and stop polluters. And I'm not going to read this, but I want to say that I sort of have this principle, and it goes like this. Me, my world, the world, right? So if I'm consistent within my own life as an individual with what I'm doing to save water, to use better light bulbs, and just what are our baggies called? Those little green ones. They're biodegradable baggy sandwich bags, and all those things. Okay. And taking care of my yard, and I'm planting stuff, in my yard, and I'm, connecting with nature. So that's about me, right? And that's good. Usually if I've got integrity within myself, I can step into my community, whether that be my school or my work or my actual city and community, township, county, whatever that is, and have integrity and then be able to work in that world. So that's me and my world, and there's integrity between the two of them. And then once in a while, we get a chance to actually vote or even change the world, right? The big world. But most of the time, if you've not had integrity between yourself and your world, you probably won't get the chance to change the world. That's it.
Thank you very much. Wow, it's so good to see all of you here tonight. What I want us to do, we're going to have a time of question and answer, and I'll bring the mic around. But before we do that, I would like to spend just a little bit of time in stillness. Years ago, I was part of a gathering of preachers in Michigan, and there were a few Indigenous pastors there. And one of the things that they taught me was the power of silence. So I would like you to just spend just a few seconds in silence and ask yourself, what did you hear? And then I'm going to ask you to talk to a neighbor. Be mindful if there's either one or two other people. Don't leave anyone out. Try to include everyone. And just tell one another, what did you hear? Or ask one another, what did you hear? Okay? But first, let's be still. I invite you to talk with a neighbor or two about what you heard. All right, if you could wrap up now. Wrap up. Could wrap up, please. All right, I want to invite anyone, but let's prioritize students to ask a question of Dr. Woodley. Do you want to go up there? You want to share this mic? How would you like to work?
Does this work? Yeah, that might. Okay.
Just raise your hand and I'll come to you so you can ask the question.
So, sir, how is it that you originally discovered your passion for being a protector of the earth?
Oh, good question. I kind of don't like this position because I feel like I was down there with you and now I'm up here. Sir, and I can't take this mic down with me. Right? Can I unscrew this? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, just think of me as down there. Okay. I like that question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. Well, I would say probably my mother. So I grew up with parents who always, they lived through the Depression, and they always grew big gardens like the size of this room. They never called themselves farmers. I don't know why, but, you know, and so I got to work and play in the garden growing up. My mom had the greenest thumb of anyone I've ever met. She talked to her plants, inside and outside plants, to bushes, trees. She talked to the birds. She talked to her pets. She talked to, yeah, and I think she taught me probably just naturally, like, that there's a relationship there, and that these things have feelings too. And I think along the way, in 2000 is when I started tracking this stuff, right? And I just realized at that point, like, the Earth's in trouble, and there's got to be a reason why. And my conclusion, I might be wrong, but my conclusion is it's the Western worldview. That's what's wrong.
Dr. Woodley, first, let me just say thank you so much for coming out here and spending time with us. I am a fellow seminarian, along with Busy. I'm also a marriage and family therapy student, so I resemble your psychology remark. Thank you for that. I have been thinking about this for the last month or so because I've got multiple seminary classes where we're talking about this topic, and I feel like my mind has been opened up to this whole new world that I hadn't even thought of before. So, one, I'm just extremely grateful, but I think the fear that I'm running into with this is that I see the space that we're getting to have this conversation in now, and I'm so grateful for that. But I wonder is this enough to beat back something that's so systemically entrenched? And I guess I just want to ask, is there a way that you can think of to combat this outside of these small conversations to take this on a larger scale?
Yeah. I mean, it's always like, what do we do about the mess, right? Well, we don't just think about it, right? So this is why I try to, my wife and I have done every kind of sort of street, call it ministry or whatever you want, with like houseless people and unwed mothers and after-school tutoring programs and basketball leagues and powwows and culture camps for youth, and just sort of we've done everything throughout those years. Justice, creating organizations that fight against injustice, and we've taken on city and a county and some major employers, and we've done all that stuff. So we're at the point now where we're just sort of like teaching, right? It's like, I can't wait out there on the protest line, when there's no bathrooms around, and that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, I guess we're at the place where we can mostly just influence people. And so what are we doing? Like we can share our stories of all the things we've done, and maybe that will encourage people. We can talk about, how to go about it and some mistakes we've made. And I have a lot of hope for sort of the Gen Z and millennial generations. And I know you're not the same, so don't get mad at me for that, right? So, but I think both have said, we're not going to wait for this paradigm to work, because it's never going to work. And I think this is the answer. It's like, tap into your indigeneity, tap into the indigenous peoples around you and what they're teaching and sharing, and fight for some of the things they're fighting for, because I can guarantee you it's almost all about taking care of the earth. Just get started. It's like, start in one place, right? All right, I'm going to date myself. My favorite comedian is Billy Crystal. Like, who's that? Who's Bill? That City Slickers, right? If you saw that, it's like one thing. Just get started on one thing, and the rest will take care of itself. So a couple of my favorite authors, teachers who have a similar philosophy than I as to pedagogy, Paulo Freire and Miles Horton. There was a book that was written about one of their conversations, and that book was called You Make the Road by Walking. Later, my buddy Brian McLaren ripped that title off and wrote a book by that same title. But it's true in either place. You make the road by walking. You just get started doing something. You can overthink this. Just do what's right and get in one area, whatever, because it's all one thing. If we're to be caretakers of humanity and caretakers of the earth and the rest of the community creation, that means racism and patriarchy and all of those things are about restoring earth to a harmony way or shalom way of being, right? And so just get started in one place and it should lead to the other. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I've always been interested in learning more about Native American culture. Do you have any recommendations for museums or certain interactive experiences people can get started with so they can learn more about caring for the earth?
So I missed part of that, I think, because of your mask. Do you have any recommendations about?
Recommendations about learning more about Native American culture, like interactive experiences like museums or ways you can get involved?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff. You guys have a lot of Native tribes in Washington, and they're all doing stuff. Just start looking them up and watching their events page. Today, we spent most of the day up at the Indian Center, right? Because it's Indigenous People Day and what was going on there. that was going on. There was other ones in different places around the greater Seattle area. There's powwows all the time. Those are open events you can go to. There's other cultural events. There's a number of museums around. So if you just like start using the, your online resources and just start looking up the tribes and what they're doing, you'll find stuff. So.
I'm one of your stalkers. You've influenced me. Is that the right way to say it? I'm not really on Instagram, but I've read some of your books, and I've heard you say before, when you teach, you bring people to your farm. So I'm wondering it's fun to learn from you, from your books. It's been great learning from you tonight, but I'm wondering if we were at your farm, how would you teach us there? What would that be like?
Yeah, so we've kind of got it down to some things that seem to have worked. So we have these extended weekend schools, and they go basically Thursday night through Sunday afternoon, and we sit around and talk around the fire. We get to know one another. We share our stories with each other. We do some teaching times. We do some ceremony together. We watch Native movies together and talk about why certain times white people didn't laugh and Native people did, or why Native people laughed and white people didn't, and we just kind of build our relationship through a very informal pedagogy, through very informal means there. At the ground, we usually spend a couple hours with people like working the ground, working the land, doing something, getting them in touch. We send people out for an hour in nature and say, come back and talk about what you saw. Stuff like that, yeah. And we are actually, today we kicked off, and I'm pretty sure there are no like really rich people in the room, but maybe there are, I don't know. Ben, are you? But we kicked off our campaign for a building campaign today on Indigenous Peoples Day. So we've got to raise some money and build a building so that we can have our schools year round instead of those like the 3-week window in the spring and 3-week window in the fall. Like you guys know what that's about here, because there's nowhere to get out of the rain afterwards and nowhere to get out of the sun, before. So, yeah. So we should have that school built by next late spring. Or school. It's just a building. It's a pole barn, basically,
I had a question about the farm as well. It's one of the first places I think you and I met. You welcomed me when I was brand new to Oregon. But in what ways have you had to adapt? How has the land taught you adaptation?
Yeah. So I think our thing is like to go to the land and sort of like ask it, like, what is it you're wanting to do here? What was it before? What's it doing now? What's it need? Where's it need repairing? And then we set about that, and we also look at the whole community of creation. So, for example, our farm, only about maybe an acre and a half are in like farming. The rest is like we got a little section as a campground. We got some teepees and a yurt and some places for tents. And then, but a lot of it, probably at least a third of it, is like we've got this hardwoods area, we've got this thick plum thicket, and then we've got this like scrub forest in the back. And we didn't want to push our non-human neighbors out, right? So there's all kinds of wildlife there. It's crazy. Deer, elk, coyotes, pheasants, eagles, harrier hawks, hummingbirds, quail, on and on and on. And this little, 10 acre gets visited by all these things all the time. And so we said, well, we don't need to do anything with all this. Let's just make room for other neighbors. And so we felt like, that was the community of creation speaking to us. And so it's this balance. And I think the idea is to sort of find out what it wants to do, what the land wants to do, and then say, now here's what we want to do. How do we go about bending nature, if you will, to help us without breaking it, right? So that's kind of how we approach it.
Thanks so much for that really important and challenging talk. I'm a bit troubled by the idea that there's a Western worldview, in part because to use the language of Western is actually to sort of adopt a point of view from which Europe is at the center, right? And that they've used that language in order to place a certain point of view at the center and sort of distinguish themselves from others. But also there've always been parts of European culture that have challenged that sort of idea of mastering nature. And
Absolutely.
what I'd like to ask is, do you see any particular sort of pockets of that could be engaged in helpful dialogue about this more indigenous way of looking at nature that might help us to work with it? I mean, do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There are more than one Western worldview, but the worldview that I'm talking about, I consider to be the predominant worldview handed down from the Greeks. That sort of this dualism, Platonic dualism, and hierarchies, and extrinsic categorization, and all of those sorts of things have been baked in the bread and passed down to a Greco-Roman society, to a British society, and now an American society. And they all have influenced and almost gone full circle. I mean, we still, think about, I hear people on TV, politicians talking about Greek civilization. And, if you look, Washington, D.C., there's definitely some influence there from the founding fathers and the people that started putting those, Roman columns up and things. And so, so it's the worldview that has created basically the America that is platonically dualistic, and that is shown in our education system. It's one of the worst, in fact. I've been in academia for a while. In our economic systems, in our social systems, in our judicial systems. All of these things have been created from a particular worldview that is antithetical to a Native American worldview. So, but there are groups. There have always been groups. There have always been sort of the hippies and the earthies. They're like the Mennonites are trying to do a lot of stuff. Some of the Friends. Everybody's starting to have like racial and inclusion groups and denominations, and you get understanding people in those. And so I'm very hopeful about sort of like where we're turning, but we're not turning fast enough. And so, so I don't think it's time to pat us on the back yet, but I think there is hope, and there are a lot of affinity groups that people can join in different areas like that who, even if you're not Native, who are from a Western worldview going, these are not the values that we want. And I have the most hope, actually, for the church, because while our record of being open is not that well, we're sort of not that great. We're sort of at the place where like the church is desperate now because it realizes it's not going to survive unless it does something different, which is a great place to be in. So.
What's an example of a way we can practice not resisting change and going along with the natural way of things in daily life?
Okay. So, that's a really good question. Yeah, you might have me stumped here. Probably we have enough wisdom in the room to figure out like what that would be. But, okay, so I've got a friend who was pastoring a very successful church. And I think their church is called the Church of the Wild. And there's now a movement called like Wilderness Church or something like that. I think that might have been there. And so they met for years and years as a community. They did a bunch of stuff together. And they never had a building. They actually met outside and with nature and used like St. Francis prayers and different things like that, right? So there's an example of a sort of a structural way. For individual, I think it's just saying, realizing every day that the structures that are built aren't going to last, and that I have to find new ways of doing that. And probably the best way is to commune with nature every day, and to see what you can be taught, because that's our first and greatest teacher. Before there was a Bible, there was creation. No, for real. Right? So, okay.
I liked how you talked about God as the vulnerable one, right? Not highlighting particularly God's power, but God's vulnerability. How do you think God exerts influence in the world?
That's a great question. You're a theologian? Is that? I have a buddy. His name is Thomas J. Ord. Anybody know Tom? Right. So then he writes these books like God Can't. And are you familiar with any of that stuff? Okay. And they have this whole group now called Open and Relational Theology. And they get into lots of in-depth understanding of that. And by and large, I agree with them, right? But in terms of like how what's the utility that God uses to do that? I don't know. That's just not my bag. I don't really, maybe I'm just not smart enough to figure that one out. But I think influence, maybe, I don't know. Like everything about, my favorite word describing God is our native word, this great mystery. I think that's the greatest and the most sure theological thing you can say about God. And so, like, I'm open to hearing your ideas about it, and you be open to mine, and we'll all, but in the end, none of us are going to be sure, right? So I'm just going to defer to my smarter friends like Tom Ord. So, yeah.
Thank you for the talk. Really, really good. So I teach ecology here, and certainly coming up from a Western viewpoint. And a couple of things you said really made me think, and I would really love to hear you kind of flesh it out for me a little bit. When you say things like the earth strikes back and things, we listen to the land, which really seems to give some agency to the land, and maybe even from a spiritual perspective. As somebody educated through the Western system, that's different. Right? That's really different from the way we've been thinking about it. And I think that may be one of the things that you're calling out in the Western worldview.
Yeah.
So as a Trinitarian and as somebody coming from the Indigenous mindset, can you help us think about what that means when we're listening to the land or talking about giving agency to something we're not used to thinking about that way?
Yeah. My wife might be able to answer this better than me. I don't know. She's going, no. She's pretty good at talking about the land. I think we could definitely look at these patterns and what's going on and say, like, the earth is speaking, right? Are we listening? And of course, I'm only theorizing that what's going on is, we are out of balance because we're taking a place that is not rightfully ours as human beings. We're consuming too much energy, and the earth is striking back. And actually, it came to me one day that how this came to me, I was like reading in Deuteronomy, right? And it says, because of your sin, the earth will spit out its inhabitants. And I started thinking, like, I wonder if that has to do with like what's happening now, Like we like to think about like moral sin, right? Well, it's pretty immoral what we're doing to the earth. And so, maybe the earth is spitting out its inhabitants because it's not going to take it anymore. I don't know. But here's the thing. So you teach ecology. Have you guys seen the documentary, The Year the Earth Changed? Yeah. So that's another way the earth speaks, right? It's like all of a sudden in this, how many have seen that? The Year the Earth Changed. You guys may need to watch that as a university or something. So it's narrated by Sir Richard Attenborough. And what it does is it talks about like how the earth begins to heal itself in the year of COVID, right? Different animal species and different, the earth itself is responding. And it was incredible. It's an incredible, hopeful movie. If you're discouraged about climate change, definitely watch it. Is it Prime or Netflix? I think it's Prime, maybe. And so I think the earth is just waiting for a chance to heal, right? It's like going to pounce on that, and it did during COVID. And during the worst parts of COVID, the first year when everybody was absent, right? So, so that's just another case of, I think, the earth speaking. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your wisdom today. I have a question about, so I'm from also a culture that values the land and a collectivistic culture. And one thing that I struggle with is when I'm in these spaces where I'm trying to explain to people or trying to show people how community would look like. It's really hard when it's like when they see things from a Western perspective. And as a person who's been doing this work, what is like one thing that keeps you going and keeps you motivated to keep talking about this? Because it can get pretty exhausting, I feel like, because people are coming from this very popular point of view of individualistic and more important than the earth. But you know that we are it's a system. We're part of a system, right. And nothing is greater than the other. And everyone has everything has its role. So how do you, with that understanding, and I'm in education, a Western education system. With all that, how do you still kind of just keep going and bring up the conversations?
Yeah, that's really important. Because I think maybe we're one of the most individualistic societies that ever existed on Earth in America. I don't know. Yeah, we've gotten away from the communal nature, and we think that the Bible is written to us as individuals, when actually it's written for you all, is in plural and all those kinds of things, and our individual happiness is just a byproduct of our communal good, right? The common good. And so this whole idea of shalom sort of breaks through in that, and our harmony way in Native America and other cultures, South Africa and Butu, right? They're different. Navajos have Hojon. We all have different ways of expressing this way of harmony and being, but it's all about being communal. It's all about solving our problems together. It's all about realizing that, well, somebody said it this way, in a Western worldview, the saying is we are because I am. And in an indigenous worldview, the saying is I am because we are. And it's a very different way of looking at things. It might just be a few words turned around, but it's a world of difference. And so we've got to learn to get back together. And believe it or not, folks, Jesus intended his followers to be the people who created that system, right? So that we would have these groups that we could work together, and not just within our particular tribes or whatever, but creating sort of tribes that rely on one another. And that's what the church is supposed to be, is those communities. And it is discouraging. I get tired. But I had an elder say to us one time, when some people we thought were very capable of pulling a Native conference together, they were white, and they got us as the main speakers, and they had a bunch of other Native speakers, and there were probably about 30 Native people there. And they failed miserably. They thought they'd done all their work, but they really hadn't. And so the elder who was there said to us, you guys have to do this. I know it's tiring. I know you're frustrated. But if you don't do it, nobody's going to do it. And do I really want white folks organizing and educating each other about Native people? No, not really. So it sort of falls on some of us who are either brave enough or dumb enough to do it. So, yeah.
Two more questions.
What do you think about the idea of the integration of technology and nature? And what I mean by that is nowadays it seems like we have technology that's starting to impact and change our biology. And for better or for worse, it looks like that's something that, at least for the time being, is here to stay. How are we supposed to look at that innovation through the lens of an indigenous worldview? Yeah.
So that really sounds like a good conversation for Brian in his field. That's a field of ethics, and it's Yeah, I would have to say, case by case, looking at it. The main thing about anything that we do is like thinking about how it's going to affect all the generations forward, the negative effects of it. We don't generally do that, right? We rush in and say, how can we make money off this? And that's the problem. I don't know if it's the technological problems, and of course, that stuff gets kind of creepy to me, but, I've got this very limited view. It's thinking through them. I mean, how many of our big industrial corporations actually have ethicists who have, one, have ethicists, two, have any power or any say in what happens? This is what's missing. And so, maybe the future holds creating those spaces. I don't know.
I think one question I have is regarding, the adopting an Indigenous worldview, adopting that perspective. How do you navigate those conversations where sometimes it turns into appropriation? Because I've found that really difficult when I'm encouraging people to adopt an Indigenous worldview, to share in these things I carry. But sometimes it turns into white people wanting to be like, well, I want to do it the way you do it, or
Yeah.
I need to do it that way because you guys clearly have it figured out. How do you navigate conversations about appropriation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the difference is, what I'm trying to ask people to do is to appropriate Native values, because many and most of them are the same values that Jesus taught. And they're what Indigenous people all over the world in lots of places have taught. And so those same values, there's sort of some core values there and then how you celebrate those and how you remember those and how you sing about those and those are the things that individual groups that belong to those groups. And so you don't get to use their stuff without their permission, right? With permission from the right people. But we all have groups. We might just make up a group and say, let's figure out a ceremony. Let's figure out a song. Let's figure out a dance. I don't know. I don't know. People are looking to their Celtic spirituality. They're looking to their, Scandinavian spirituality. They're looking for these kinds of places for those cultural things. They don't have to use Native American cultural things. But if they want to, they have to get proper permission to do it. So just like anybody, when I came to, because we're from different places in the world, different places in the U.S., we're settlers in someone else's land, the land of the Kalapuyans. And so we went to them and we asked permission to be there, and we asked, what we could do to honor their people and, their relationship with the land and the land. And then we asked if we could hold our own ceremonies that we've been taught, my own Katua ceremonies and Yiddish Shoshone ceremonies and things. And so, and they said, yes, you have our permission to use your ceremonies, but don't use ours. And I'm like, of course not. I wouldn't do that without your permission. But so I think that's just a sort of a simple rule, right, among tribal peoples. It's like we can. And there's certain protocol ways that go about, like certain tribes have borrowed and learned particular ceremonies and dances from other tribes. That's kind of common, but there are ways to go about doing that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Woodley. And let's... Go in peace, friends.